Welcome to the Connections community. My name is Elizabeth Parks and I'm the president of Parks Associates, a market research and consulting firm focused on emerging consumer technologies. Since 1986, we've been looking closely at emerging products in the home for consumers, consumer devices and services like home security and automation, connected entertainment, connected health, and broadband services in the home. This year would have been our 24th year to host our signature event, Connections, the premier connected home conference. We would also be hosting our 15th annual Connections Europe event in November in Amsterdam. While it's an enormous disappointment that we can't host our in-person events this year, we know they play a huge role in networking, visibility for leading players in the smart home space, and interacting with our analyst team and key players. In place of these events, we're bringing you the Connections community, a virtual experience that will take place through the end of November. We will be live streaming our analysts, industry leaders, and hosting panel discussions through the SwapCard platform, where attendees can log in for live viewing, view past recorded sessions, and interact with fellow Connections community participants during our live sessions. We want to thank our sponsors of our events, many of whom have supported our efforts for years. We really are striving to bring individuals together to network and communicate about the important issues our industries are facing, particularly as we all navigate the new way to accomplish things. Our Connections community platform allows for a live stream view and conversations with our community members. You can ask questions, chat with the group, chat with individuals, and even have a video meeting spontaneously with community members. Following the session, we'll have open networking discussions on video for more dialogue with our analyst team and community members. We have already had some great sessions on the platform as part of the Connections community experience. If you're just joining us, or if you missed a previous session, you can go back on the agenda calendar to watch these on demand. These virtual experiences lead up to 3 days of networking fun, where Parks Associates will present a state of the smart home market, the value in elevated user experiences, monitoring and expansion beyond security systems, smart home platforms, seniors and technology, and the impact of new technologies focused on proactive and predictive analytics, as well as the impact of 5G and Wi-Fi 6. We are proud to bring together over 1,000 executives so far, with more members joining daily. Our team looks forward to your feedback. For any comments or interest in learning more about visibility options or speaking, please reach out to me or any of our team members. Use the question tab to ask your questions or to upvote your favorite questions from other attendees. You can also answer polling questions under polls to give your live vote. Our analysts and panel speakers will be addressing your questions and the polling answers during the live stream. Ask your questions early in the presentation, as our analysts will choose the most upvoted questions to be addressed by the session speakers. If you have any questions during the stream about SwapCard, our team is standing by to help. Just drop a message in the chat or message one of Parks Associates team members via the Parks Associates company page. We want to make sure you're connecting with our industry-leading sponsors in the smart home space. You can visit any sponsor during the session by navigating to the Sponsors tab, browse sponsors, or bookmark the ones that interest you for later. Contact the sponsor via chat, view uploaded documents, watch welcome videos, and more. Have you created your personal event agenda on SwapCard? Go to the Agenda tab, view different sessions under each date, add the sessions that interest you to your personal event agenda. You can access your personal event agenda by clicking the My Event tab. Export your agenda to your calendar to receive reminders and a direct link to your registered sessions. Some of Parks Associates' latest consumer research, Households with Children Dominant Tech Purchases, reveals households with children, particularly those ages 6 through 11, are the leading demographic groups for technology products and entertainment service purchasing. About 30% of broadband households have children at home, which translates to about 32 million households. In general, households with children are young enough to be receptive to smart home technology, but old enough to have the income and educational levels associated with smart home adoption. This group self-identifies as innovators. They likely are purchasing new products early in its life cycle and more than twice the rate of broadband households. Combining this strong technology affinity with the need to buy products for their children creates a powerful tech buying segment. 38% of U.S. broadband households with children plan to buy a smart video doorbell over the next 12 months, compared to 14% of households without children. 90% of households with children at home subscribe to at least one OTT service. Key factors that could inhibit future adoption are the COVID-19 outbreak and resulting financial impacts. 1/2 of U.S. broadband households with children at home worry about their financial stability, and 61% are more cost conscious because of the COVID-19 outbreak. It's important for the device makers and service providers to emphasize the essential value in their solution, such as safety and security, although entertainment is also critically important for households with children. New content offerings for OTT services that highlight children's content or educational content will help keep this group engaged, especially as we continue to see some states encouraging or mandating consumers to stay at home. We look forward to talking more about consumer segments at our upcoming events.
Hello and welcome to Connections Community. I'm Brad Russell, Research Director for Connected Home at Parks Associates. This morning, we are thrilled to kick off our 3-day flagship event, which has gathered together industry leaders from pioneers to Generation Next for 2.5 decades. Of course, this year is like no other year for so many reasons. I'm not going to use those words we've heard way too many times this year. We know these are unblanking times. Instead, we want to talk about things like N-words, like innovation and insight and creating inflection points. We want to look to the future this week, to what's next, and find out from one another how our companies can chart a path that drives the whole industry forward. So, on behalf of the Parks Associates team, we want to welcome you. Although we're not all in one hotel together and we won't get to share a cocktail at the end of the day, we hope you will give us your full attention. Join us for as many sessions as you can and get the most out of engaging with our amazing speakers and awesome sponsors. This year, we have over 1,300 registered attendees in the Connections community, and each of you is a critical part of the conversation. You can interact with these sponsors in Swap Card. You can submit questions for our guest speakers and panelists. You can take part in audience polls, and you can join us for some virtual FaceTime and Zoom networking discussions following each of the tracks throughout the day. Now, here's a look at how each of our sessions will be organized with 3 sessions a day for the next 3 days. This morning, I will, after this welcome, kick off our conversation with an analyst insight section. That'll run for about 20 to 25 minutes. We hope to save a few minutes for your questions at the end, so feel free to submit those early in the questions tab. Following my presentation, we'll have a visionary insight presentation this morning with Nooper Davis from Comcast. Cybersecurity is always a burning issue for IoT, and even more so now with elevated home networking usage. Following that, we'll bring in our panel. We'll talk about tipping points and triggers for connected home services. And then after the session is over, we'll have a 30-minute opportunity for you to participate in Zoom networking discussions. One is topical and one is offered by one or more of our sponsors. You'll find those links at the very bottom of this track's agenda. I just opened the Zoom networking link, and then you can just click directly into Zoom to join those conversations as well. We encourage our panelists and our speakers to participate in those conversations, so it's always a great time to get some FaceTime with them. Great, so with that introduction, let me move into my comments this morning. So here is a picture of me at the beach. Okay, no, it's not. But when I think about the future, I hope that we'll look back at 2020 and I hope it will be remembered as a year of resilience and riding the waves of change. We all know the triple tsunamis of COVID-19 and economic downturn and social disruption have been challenging, and yet they are conversely energizing companies and consumers alike. I was leading a conversation recently in the residential security industry, and we were talking about how at least the major players were doing quite well despite all the challenges. But I asked the group where they thought regional and smaller dealers were faring in their own unique environments. And someone in the group wisely said, I've seen that the ones who from the beginning attacked the problems and pressed on are doing well, but those who got frozen with fear are struggling. That's certainly not to reduce the very real stress and strain in the business climate we're in, but getting on top of the wave is the only way to make its energy work for you and not against you. So what does that look like? Well, certainly disruption drives adaptation. And there are signs all around of the smart home industry adapting to the wave conditions. This year, we've seen many companies adapting their sales, installation, and support efforts. Biz dev folks have been forced to rethink how they make connections and do deals. We think about how companies are reevaluating the dynamics between DIY and self-install and pro-install or do it for me or with me kinds of installations that provide hybrid digital support along with coaching in the installation process. Many companies have had to expand their digital assets for support by creating more videos and more broader knowledge base. Many companies that did not have really strong direct-to-consumer efforts have been building out e-commerce assets. And a lot of these changes are going to bode very well for companies in the long term. We know that some have had to develop alternative supply chains as a response not only to COVID-19 limitations, but also ongoing trade wars. We know that many products that were announced back in January in CES have had to reschedule their product launches, but it's created an opportunity to remessage those launches, to speak more directly to consumer needs, to express empathy for the pain points that families are struggling with. And so to reposition products as essential, a key word in this year's conversation. We also know that many products are forced to deal with cautious consumer spending behaviors. I'll show some data in a moment that at least reveals that by mid-year, fewer consumers were as cautious economically, but that is a lingering problem and challenge to be adapted to. And finally, we see new opportunities to address new use cases as more and more families are working at home, schooling at home, doing healthcare at home, that there are new opportunities to describe how connected technologies not only have value as kind of remote access and control, but they also expand comfort, convenience, and safety, even when one is spending more time inside the home. Now, along with the waves that companies are forced to surf, we also see that consumers are discovering their own resilience, and they're being lifted by waves too. As consumers, again, are working from home and schooling from home and doing so many things from home, that we've seen that their interest in consumer technology has significantly grown in the course of their experience. In a recent survey that we fielded in July of this year, we asked consumers about a variety of smart home use cases and asked whether their COVID experience had increased their interest, decreased their interest, or basically stayed the same. And what we found is that almost a third report that they value technology products and services now more than ever before due to their COVID-19 experience. And this value cuts across a range of technologies in the home. Now, more specifically, we find that consumer interest in a range of smart home use cases has increased. Leading the pack, those with vacation homes, almost 30% of them say that they've increased interest in leveraging smart home solutions to keep their vacation or rental properties monitored. Certainly keeping properties and families safe, interest has grown there. The increased reliance on Wi-Fi and whole home networking has driven interest in those kinds of use cases. Indoor air quality, which has been growing in interest among consumers and builders alike, has seen a boost. Monitoring access points. So not only remote access to video doorbells and cameras and door locks, but now with increased package deliveries, third-party services, and increased traffic at the front door, consumers are more and more interested in devices that help them monitor those access points. And Parks Associates measured 15 or 20 different use cases, but we've seen across the board consumer interest increasing. Now, this interest may not necessarily have translated into sales just yet, given the economic uncertainty, but we already know that many consumers have adopted a pattern of waiting until the fourth quarter to buy technology at the lowest cost of the year. But there is definitely this wave of interest, which, if not capitalized on this year, is deferring and will bode well for 2021. Now, we've also asked consumers about their likelihood of making changes to their home in the coming year, whether that change is starting a home renovation project or relocating to a new area or moving to a new home in the same area. And so we find that, again, 1 in 3 respondents intend to make some kind of change to their home in the next 12 months, with 23% indicating that they have an interest in starting a home renovation project. The combined numbers of people who are thinking about either relocating to a new area or moving to a new home in the same area, that's 29%, which actually is about double the share of those people a year ago who said they might move in the next 12 months. Now, we know there's a lot of factors driving that. We know that on the lower income levels and those who have been most stressed economically, that there is a need to relocate for cost savings. Simultaneously, we know that many people are reevaluating the way they live in their homes and are rethinking their space needs or the configuration of their home or some other aspect of their home that's been challenged by COVID-19. All of these create opportunities for the smart home sector. We know also that these intentions to make changes in your home also translate into higher smart home device purchase intentions, so that 82% of those who say they are very likely to move to a new home also express intentions to purchase some kind of smart home device in the coming year. Similarly, we see the same kind of elevated intentions among those who are likely to relocate and those who are likely to start a home renovation project. This high intention rate is highly reported among innovators and early adopters, and 56% of innovators are highly likely to make changes in their home. Now, when we're thinking about household spending changes due to COVID-19, we find that persistent economic uncertainty and the second COVID-19 wave continue to impact household spending, especially on discretionary purchasing. When we fielded a survey in summer, only 11% of broadband households reported an increase in their spending in July, a rate that was significantly lower than 17% in May. We know at the end of July, the additional $600 weekly unemployment benefit supplement expired. And we know the consumer confidence is being reported at a 6-year low. Now, while there's been a decrease in the percentage of households spending more, the number of households spending less has also decreased by almost half, so that a larger share in July were reporting no change as opposed to that had reported change in the month of May. So although consumer spending has been cut, especially on non-essential purchases, several categories, including electronics, have seen an increase in spending. Now, at Parks Associates, we've also been following very closely expenditures on purchasing actions taken to take care of older family members due to COVID-19. We know our most vulnerable elders, especially those living alone, are of a great concern to American families. And so we found in Q2 2020 that about 6 to 8% of elder caregivers had purchased some kind of device or system to help them care for a loved one during COVID-19. Now, you'll see in the orange box there, those specific kinds of devices and systems include things such as a new communication device for a loved one, a device or system to monitor their health, a new device to help entertain them, or a device or system to monitor a loved one's safety. Now, keep in mind, this is 6 to 8% of all broadband households who had purchased just in a couple of months prior, March, April, May or so, when COVID began. So this is really significant, although it's in single digits, as family members are thinking about how they can leverage technology to better meet the needs of elders in their lives. Now, let me share a brief dashboard of various metrics that provide some of Parks Associates' baseline metrics for understanding the current state of the smart home market. First of all, we find that 30% of US broadband households own one or more specific smart home devices. This is our core trending number where we present a specified list of devices like lights, locks, thermostats, and other smart home automation devices to measure how many people have adopted one or more and how many new greenfield buyers are coming into the market. Since Q4 of 2019, this number has been relatively flat by mid-year 2020. So it grew by 1% since December in 2014. So as far as greenfield buyers, we can't say, at least from the data, that we're seeing more than a massive movement into smart home device adoption. But we certainly, as we always have been seeing the last number of years, existing smart home device owners buying more and more devices. Now, a more broader question that we ask consumers is apart from a specified list, is do you own anything that can be remotely accessed, monitored, or controlled using a smartphone, tablet, computer, or smart speaker? So this number does not include smart speaker adoption. And so we find that 38% of people in mid-2020 report owning some kind of connected device. Now, another metric that we measure is just the installed base of working security systems. Historically, these have been foundational to smart home adoption. And so we find that mid-year 2020, about 30 to 31% of US broadband households report owning a working security system. This number dipped slightly from Q4 2019. We'll be interested to see by year end whether this number rebounds a bit. The security industry has been fairly resilient this year. And so we're forward to see what the Q4 numbers will report. Finally, we have seen the smart speaker adoption throughout the COVID-19 crisis has continued to rise. So where in December of 2019, we were at about 40% adoption, 41%, that adoption of smart speakers or smart displays has now risen to 45%. We know that these have been a favored home control interface by many consumers. And then finally, as regarding purchase intentions for the next 6 months, measured in July, 40% of US broadband households report their intention to make some kind of smart home purchase in the coming year. Now, when we look at specific device categories, we find that those smart home devices leading in adoption pretty much follow the pattern that they've been, with the exception of video doorbells, who moved into the top 5 devices in Q4 2019. But smart thermostats, network cameras, video doorbells, smart light bulbs, smart plugs are the top 5 devices by virtue of adoption. Video doorbells have risen to the very top, garnering the highest purchase intentions of any specific smart home device, so that 22% of households report their intention to buy a video doorbell in the next 6 months, followed by smart light bulbs, smart thermostats, smart smoke detectors. And outdoor light fixtures with cameras have been a new product category that has broken into the top 5, as following consumer interest in video-based devices, outdoor light fixtures with cameras are garnering more and more enthusiasm among consumers. Once again, we always like to remind people that we never expect all of these purchase intentions to be fulfilled. If a fifth to a quarter of them were, that would be great as far as driving purchases. But it helps us understand the relative interest of consumers across various product categories. Finally, let me make a few comments about households who have professionally monitored security and their likelihood of making changes to security systems in the coming year. We find that actually there's a very good likelihood of system changes between July and year end by pro-monitored security households. Keep in mind, this question is a multi-select question, and so clearly some owners intend to make several changes. But in many ways, the horse race is neck and neck between some options, so that we find 41% of pro-monitored security households report plans to upgrade their system in some way. That could be a panel grade, that could be some other kind of upgrade. An equal amount report their interest in self-installing an add-on device to their system. Another 39% report upgrading their monitoring service. That could be a layering on other kinds of capabilities. If they didn't have smart home, adding that. If they didn't have video and cloud storage, adding that. 38% report an interest in scheduling a professional to add a device to their system as opposed to self-installing. And then finally, we see about a third report the possibility, at least, that they might cancel their security monitoring contract. Now, this certainly recognizes that there is a segment of pro-monitored security customers that have been more challenged than others by the economic environment. And so we know that a number of, especially the major monitored security providers, have offered some form of payment relief. And about a third of pro monitoring subscribers have offered some kind of payment relief. And we found that among those who know that they're offered payment relief from their provider, about 3/4 of them report that they're taking advantage of it. So this is an example of a more cost-conscious consumer segment that sees the value of the service, but they're struggling. And so there are things that companies can do to retain these customers and not lose them during the economic downturn. Now, we're still looking for that year-end swell. Everyone is optimistic about Q4. Beginning in October, we started to see price cutting by some of the major retailers and online retailers. And we know that increasingly Q4 is a time when many consumers and households wait to purchase products at the best prices of the year. As we think more broadly, we certainly anticipate that all of our pre-COVID expectations for the market are not likely to be fulfilled. And yet there are many companies that will be very pleased if they can hold their own or get back to where they were at the end of 2019. At the end of the day, I think resilience is its own reward. It is the adaptation is the mark of a leader. Now, we have just a couple of minutes left. If you have a question, you could submit that through the questions tab. But as we wait to see if there's any questions, we are going to roll a video as we prepare to introduce our visionary Insight speaker, Nooper Davis. Thank you. All right, we're back. We had a couple of questions come in during the break. Let me quickly address one of them, and then we'll move on to our visionary insight speaker. So, both of the questions related to tech giants, and so one of the questions was how big an impact will the tech giants play? I think you'll find throughout the course of the week, this is a topic that we'll be touching on from a variety of different directions. We certainly anticipate tech giants will continue to play a substantive role in the smart home industry, whether that is from voice assistants, personal assistance platform as a very frictionless, seamless way for consumers to control products easily. From the perspective of their endpoint solutions, whether it's cameras or video doorbells or other things. From a perspective of data and integrating various sources of data. So we expect tech giants to play an increasing role, whether that is in the security space or the connected health space or home automation space, three areas, and energy, four areas, which they have all been very interested in. But we'll talk about this more. We'll talk about Google and ADT, and it's certainly in our last session on future investment. We'll be talking specifically about the role of tech giants in the future of the industry. So thanks for your question. Again, if you have questions for our insight speaker coming up, get those in early so we can present those at the end of her talk. Well, at this time, it's my extreme pleasure to introduce Nooper Davis. Nooper is the Executive Vice President for Chief Product and Information Security Officer at Comcast. Nooper has a long history in the technology industry, including a stint with Intel. She currently is responsible for overseeing the full range of cybersecurity functions for both consumer and business-facing products. Nooper, welcome. Pleasure to have you this morning.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me.
We can.
Perfect. Then, there's always this kind of moment where you go, okay, will everything work or not? But thank you, Brad. Those were some really amazing stats that you shared. And what I'm going to talk about for the next 25-ish minutes is a kind of multifaceted approach to IoT security that we take at Comcast. And it is a complex field, made, of course, more complex by some of the data that Brad showed about the growth of IoT devices in our ecosystems. As I talk about this, we're very proud of the work we do in cybersecurity for Comcast, for our customers, but we're also very humble. We know that security is a journey, not a destination, and we are on that journey, and we are still far from the destination. We will always keep trying to get better. So, as I go through this and talk about all the good things that we've done, please, I want to make sure that we all understand that we still have a lot of work to do, right? So with that, let me start how Brad started, right, with some data. And what you're seeing is results from an inaugural Comcast Cyber Health Report that will be published in the next 2 weeks. And it's really exciting stuff. What this report has done is we have taken data from our 18 million plus gateways that have advanced security, XFi advanced security enabled. And we've married that, real-time empirical data with data from a survey that we conducted across our customer base. Really interesting. I think it's the first time that has been done, right? Empirical data from 18 million plus devices, plus data from a survey. And some of the results are really interesting. First, consumers really underestimate the attack volume. Our data show that there is over 104-ish average attacks per month that our XFi product is mitigating. Customers have, when you look at the survey results, you'll see a real gross underestimation compared to what we see empirically. Consumers also are disconnected. And again, I'm not blaming consumers here. This is not a blame game, right? It just shows the gap and shows a challenge for us is how do we close this gap, right, between where the consumers are and where the reality is. So The second thing we see again is consumer disconnect on cyber safety behavior. So when we asked, some very basic questions in our survey about, basic cyber threats like phishing and malware, and very, very, very few consumers surveyed even knew what it was or what the impact of those could be on their lives. And then finally, a issue with IoT devices is there is usually no screen. So without a screen, these devices kind of fade into the background. And with that fading into the background, consumers have very little confidence that they would even know if something bad was going on, right? From a security point of view. So the report is going to be published in a couple of weeks. We're really excited about it. It's going to have a lot more detail and a lot more data, but I just wanted to share a few of the kind of highlights with you. But some more data, and this is again building on what Brad just shared with us. Of our 18 million xFi gateways that support advanced security, we can see how many devices are connected. And our average number is around 13, but our power users, and this is my household happens to be one of those power user households. For our power users, we see 35, 40. I think in my home, there's probably about 50 connected devices, right, to these gateways. So, and what we see in long-term trends is that what is average user and what is power user, both of those keep going up, right? So in a few years, what we see as average what we see as power will become average, and the power will become even more, right? So the scale is just growing. So what we do at Comcast is a very multifaceted approach to IoT security, and I'll talk about all three of these today. First is a life cycle view, of course, right? The life cycle view is all the way from when the device is manufactured to when it is in operations, and then to when it is actually retired, right? And put away. The second is that very, very few IoT devices work in isolation. They're part of a larger ecosystem. And so we really focus on that ecosystem. And I'll talk about that. And then finally, we are part of a national and global community. So both national and global policies, regulations, and standards are really important. That is really ultimately how IoT security, I think, will be materialized by agreements on how we do this, and what are minimum requirements that are needed in this area. And again, we are very, very involved in actually leading a lot of these standards and regulatory and policy debates and discussions. So let me focus on the first bit, which is the life cycle. And here, all of you are familiar with this. So secure manufacturing, this is where we worry about, is there any malware injection happening during the manufacturing phase? Are there any counterfeit parts or components being put into the device? Because later on, these have security or could have security implications in operations. How are keys captured and manufactured? Are there any security backdoors being installed? Similarly, for secure operations, we really, really, really worry about authorized access, both logical and physical attacks, because some of these IoT devices are in locations where they're physically accessible for tampering, right? So this could be a outdoor door cam or a bell or something like that. Malware injection, again, we worry about it during manufacturing, we worry about it during operations. Theft of data, theft of keys and secrets. Really important is how are software updates and firmware updates being done. We are worried about not just malware during the updates, but also we have seen rollback of patches, right? So a responsible device manufacturer will patch and close security holes, refresh and update firmware, and we see bad guys roll that back to the insecure state where they can then, of course, start taking advantage of that insecurity. So, and then finally, device maintenance. And one of the biggest issues during device maintenance is transfer of a device from one user to another. And that does happen. And then finally, secure decommissioning, right, is retiring a device so that it doesn't come on board again in an unpatched or unsupported state. So little bit of more detail on this. So what are those security challenges that we worry about? And the very first is, what is the identity of my device? And this needs to be immutable. So just the way that my identity as a person is if I take, for example, my fingerprint as my identity, right, that is immutable. As long as I'm Newport Davis, hopefully, my fingerprints stay my fingerprints. So what is that immutable identity of a device? So we worry about that. And then the immediate question that follows that is, who and when was that identity provisioned and associated with a user? So that tuple, that connection of a immutable device identity with its current user is a real challenge, and something that we spend a lot of time thinking about is, how do we do that in a safe and secure way? Because remember, some devices, their identities will stay the same, but their users might change over time. And that transition is where a lot of security badness can happen. What software components are allowed to run on my device? Super important, because we really need those locked down. We need to know which components are on the device, and we need to know if any non-allowed component has been loaded on the device, and even worse, if it has been allowed to run on the device. Which of my devices upload data to any of the cloud services? And this is really insidious because, as you know, IoT devices have IP addresses, and almost all of them are communicating to some type of cloud service, right? We know of the very obvious ones because we see that happening, like a camera recording, but then there are all of the kind of hidden ones that are hidden from the consumers, but they're still communicating out. So we really need to know where they're going and what data is being sent up. And then, of course, we not only need to know that, we need to know and understand, is my data secure during transit and during rest? And then finally, the mirror of the software components on my device. I also need to know and understand the hardware components on my device, because again, if later on there is an issue discovered in a hardware component, we need to be able to know that and evaluate and understand and mitigate the risk from any issues in the hardware components. So where does that take us? Well, it really comes down to these basic security capabilities. So the very first capability that our devices have to be able to support is secure communication. And this is a TLS handshake, symmetric encryption, and just imagine that doing this requires, a key and certificates and ability for these devices to be able to handle and process those, right? So, and I'll show you in a minute the work that we've done in this area and actually open sourced, because it is really important that we think about this in the context of IoT devices with their small compute and memory constraints. Secure operations. So here, a hardware root of trust and that secure boot is super, super, super important. And again, we are doing some very, I think, I'm very proud of my team, very innovative work here. We're calling this chip to cloud security, and having that unbroken hardware root of trust from which every subsequent trust level is built all the way up to the cloud. Key storage, secure boot, of course. Secure manufacturing, this is where the hardware root of trust has to be provisioned. So, and so this is there are those key moments. When do you provision this? When do you get the device, immutable device associated? And then when do you have that tuple that I talked about, with device and owner association happen? These are key moments in those provisioning life cycle that really security is super important. And then finally, how do we update? And that I want to distinguish between a credential update. Remember, credential is the tuple between and actually tuple can have three associations: association between a device, a user, and an app. Again, device identity is just the identity of the device. And so those are kind of the vertical capabilities, but horizontally, we have to do all of this in a way that promotes simplicity, promotes compliance, promotes flexibility, and oh, by the way, it has to be cost effective, right? So this is not for the faint of heart. It is a lot of challenge that is involved in this area. I want to do a quick time check. I think I am okay. So, so this is one of the things that our team has built at Comcast, and we just open source this. If you look at all of the things that I talked about, right? I'm going to just go back here for a minute. Secure boot, TLS handshake, symmetric encryption. All of this requires a public key infrastructure and management of lifecycle management of certificates and other secrets and cryptographic capabilities. And the thing that we recognized is that we really needed to build this infrastructure in a way that it could support billions of IoT devices at scale, and recognizing the constraints of these devices, right? So the library that we've built is called XPKI, X for Xfinity. It has, of course, a web interface with full MFA authentication, full X509 lifecycle management of certificates. We have multiple libraries for multiple programming languages for multiple devices. So embedded C, iOS, Android, Java, Go, and we keep adding as we see more needs pop up. And again, these capabilities are fully integrated and integratable into a DevOps pipeline so that you can be building this in as our products are being built. And again, at the bottom, you'll see all of the platforms that this is available for. We just released this and open sourced it. So some really good work the team has done there. And we're already really literally doing billions of transactions on this platform. So that was kind of the life cycle concerns, mostly around identity, around communications, and around associations between devices, people, and applications. But that leads us straight into the second area, or the second facet, which is around the IoT ecosystem. There are very, very, very few IoT devices that work on their own. This is literally a screen grab from our Xfinity Home webpage. And this shows parts of the ecosystem, right? There is, of course, the IoT devices. You see the camera. You see some sensors. There is a controller. There are apps. What is not even being shown here are all of the cloud interactions, the gateways that actually connect, through which these connect to the internet. So that ecosystem is super, super, super important. How just securing a device by itself doesn't even come close to what is needed to really secure that ecosystem. So we spend a tremendous amount of time. We have a small team that's dedicated to our Xfinity Home, our connected living security, where we are looking at this ecosystem from a design point of view, from an architecture point of view, and from what we call build security in, or shift left, or DevSecOps. There are a lot of names for this. We have been focused on this for about 4 years, so it is, a fairly mature practice for us. About 2/3 of our development teams build their products and systems in this way. And what does build security mean? It means that as we are designing, coding, um, building, testing, validating, releasing, operating, we consider security in every one of those steps. Um, in modern development cycles, some of those steps are tiny and they're repeated over and over again. But it doesn't matter whether do your development in small bites or you do your development in big chunks. We want to make sure that we are building security into those processes. And today we have what we call our essential 11 practices. In our secure development lifecycle, we started with the Super 7, we had the terrific 10, we are now at the essential 11, and I'm sure we are going to be adding more as we go up into that maturity journey. I'm not going to talk about all 11 of these because that will take a whole hour, but I'm going to pick a couple. First, super important from an ecosystem point of view is threat modeling. So threat modeling is kind of a look at the design and architecture of that IoT ecosystem that I talked about, and to look at any threat surfaces that are exposed in that ecosystem. And it's really amazing if we go and look at our threat modeling results, is how many threats sneak in at those intersections and integration points in that ecosystem, right? So super important that the device itself be secure, but as important and even more so that ecosystem be. So threat modeling looks at the design and architecture of those ecosystems and then finds threats and then puts up either mitigations or flat out remediations for those threats. The other two things that are mature practices for us are analysis for code written. So any code that we write, we make sure is secure. And then any code that we use, whether it's open source or imported, we look at that as well. Security peer review is something that development team members do amongst the development teams. So, person A will write code, person B will do a code review of that code from a security point of view. But then number 6 is an independent production-ready security assessment. So this includes things like, penetration tests, but also includes, this is, stuff that's done by my team, for example, but it'll also include now a code review by a security expert, right? Not just a development team peer review. One of the most interesting data that we have found, we by the way, a lot of this is automated and a lot of data, it's instrumented, so we have a ton of data. One of the things that we found in our own analysis, which we're writing a report on and we'll publish, and I think it'll be the first one of its kind, shows a very clear correlation between following these practices and the number of vulnerabilities found in operation. So the better we follow these practices, the fewer vulnerabilities we find in operation of our IoT ecosystems for our connected living and Xfinity Home products. And one of the key practices that we find there that does that correlation is this agreement that the teams make that they will only merge secure code into the main released branches, which means that they will fix high risk issues found during threat modeling or code analysis or security peer reviews or the security assessments. So a lot of good work here. Again, it's a journey, not a destination. We still have a long way to go. but very happy with all of the investment that our entire group has made, not just the security team, but every developer, every engineer has made in this. And I have 1 minute, so I'm going to just quickly talk about policies, regulations, and standards, because along with those first two things, this is super important. By the way, this is a global perspective. We really are involved into all of the international governance and innovation. By the way, we do find that consumers are willing to pay more for security. And what's really interesting is that consumers in developing economies expect to pay more, whereas consumers in developed economies expect that security is already built in, right? My last slide. It has to be a global perspective, because if you look at something like the Mirai botnet, 90% of the bots are located outside the United States. So there is security without borders. So we are, for example, very, very driving and represented in the Consumer Technology Association's C2 consensus baseline. And by the way, I think they just agreed and released the first testable specification of that. And we were, again, very not only involved, but had leadership roles there. And then finally, one of the other things that we are very involved in is the Connected Home over IP, the CHIP consortium. We are one of the founding members and part of the steering committee, along with Amazon, Apple, Google, and Samsung. And really, we've contributed code, we've contributed libraries, we've contributed specifications to these efforts, and we'll continue to do so, because we really do believe that ultimately this is a team sport. So with that, I'm going to see if there are any questions. Again, just to summarize, multifaceted approach, a life cycle view, an ecosystem view, and then a global and national view of how do we build systems that will withstand the security challenges.
Great. Thank you so much, Nooper.
Yep.
Clearly, it is a massive undertaking with just thousands of moving parts. So yeah, thanks for helping us see the big picture and even some of the complexity kind of underneath
Right.
the hood. We did have a couple of questions from the audience. So the first is related to kind of understanding the difference between ISP seeing devices on your network and actually accessing them, right? So
Yes.
they ask if my ISP can see my
Always.
IoT devices
You
on
always
my
worry
network.
about that, right? It's like, so this is, by the way, our advanced security product, that its job is to secure that connection. So by the way, Comcast is extremely transparent about what we do. So if you go to our website and just look at our privacy pages, it spells out, product by product, system by system, what data we collect and how we use it, and how you can opt out, by the way, of anything. So please be absolutely confident that we're not seeing anything. Our sole purpose of this is to prevent malware and security threats from these devices.
So you gather enough information to understand what the device is, whether it's behaving.
And is it doing something, it's not supposed to? And then if it is, from a security point of view, and then how do we mitigate that?
And if you quarantine it, you can quarantine it, but you can't.
You can quarantine it, put it in a walled garden, contact the customer, ask for a lot of these things are a simple reboot will fix it. So all of those are extra steps that we would take.
Okay. We had one other question, which is probably kind of a developer question.
Yeah.
That says, where can we find the open source XPKI? I can't find it in the Comcast public GitHub.
I should have put the URL for that here. How is there a way that I can do that after this?
Yeah, we can put it in the chat if you just send it to someone on our team, or you can put it
I will send it to someone on the team, and so that you can get access to it. I really want it to be open in the true open source spirit, so that others use it and improve it, right? So yeah.
Great, super. We'll make sure we get that link to the audience.
I
and
will.
you'll have access to that. Well, Nooper, again, thank you so much for your insight today. We hope we get to see you some throughout the rest of the week, perhaps.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thanks. Have a great day. Okay, next up, we're going to bring in our panelists. So we'll probably roll a couple of videos and we'll be back with you in just a moment. Thanks. Okay, welcome back. Now, the theme for our panel discussion this morning is tipping points and triggers for connected home services. There's a lot of things going on in the market. We've gathered together a great set of experts that have very different perspectives on what's going on in the market. We specifically want to talk about, what's the impact of COVID-19, both in kind of temporary changes, but also speculation about more lasting lifestyle shifts. We want to talk about triggers. What else could happen, needs to happen in order to accelerate the market further? And finally, tipping points. That is, what signs do we see that we actually may be tipping into a much greater level of adoption? So it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists this morning. Each one of them will get a few minutes to introduce themselves and describe their perspective on the topic. So first of all, welcome Oren Kotlicki, who is the founder and CEO of IntelliThings. Welcome, Oren.
Welcome, everyone. Good morning. It's a pleasure being here. Here at IntelliThings, what we do is actually bringing commercial-grade presence detection to homes. We are the first to provide smartphone-based, specific people room-level presence detection in the focusing on family applications rather than smart building applications. Some of these can be similar to what we do with the smart buildings, such as energy savings, but we have specifically gone to home automation, aging in place, and alarm systems, or specifically false alarm identification capabilities using specific people presence sensing.
Great, Oren. Thank you so much for that introduction. Next up, meet Tyson Marion. Tyson is the Chief Commercial Officer for Plume. Welcome, Tyson.
Hey, welcome, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Really appreciate that. I think we might have a couple of slides that'll pop up here. So, for those of you who don't know Plume, I'll save that for another time. Obviously, please feel free to email me at tyson@plume.com, and happy to have a conversation in depth about what Plume is about and why we get up every day and do what we do. I think more importantly is really thinking about the market out there that we see today. For decades and decades, as an ISP, we've kind of, in that space, we've kind of loved the concept of the bundle. And we love that concept of the bundle because it meant more revenue, but more importantly, it meant that we had lower churn rates, which is the highest cost of any of our businesses. And what's interesting is if we take a look at what's happened in the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen a significant change in our subscriber mix. Historically, most of our subscribers were triple play or double play customers, but we've been seeing a dramatic shift away from triple play and double play services to single play services, really centered around broadband. And what that means here on the left is you'll see that the churn rates associated with single play products are actually double what they are in double and triple play products. And when we think about that cost, kind of industry average LTVs are about $2,000. Every time we lose a customer in our industry, we lose about $2,000. So it's an extremely expensive endeavor for us to try and capture those customers back. But the market is shifting, and customers are telling us something. They're saying that their emotional attachment has moved away from kind of the old voice and video and has moved strictly to these digital services centered around broadband. And the way that we think about that is that the bundle isn't necessarily dead. It's simply just reforming itself around the broadband service itself. And to keep customers and to reduce that churn, we believe there's an opportunity to actually sell a single play service, package these new digital smart home services around it so that that single play service acts the same way that a triple play service does from a churn rate perspective. And on the right there, we think there are two things that are necessary to take place. One is to offer that customer more services, create that emotional attachment around the broadband service with these additional digital services that lead to things like peace of mind. Nooper just talked about cybersecurity. That's obviously one of the things that all customers are interested in. Parental controls, things of that nature, even physical security without sensors. So those services can sit right around that broadband product. The second is personalized customer care. The FCC puts out a study every year about why customers leave their current service providers. And the number 2 reason on those studies is customer service. So if you can provide better care, you can create emotional attachment around broadband. We think there's an opportunity, a significant opportunity, not only to capture more emotional attachment from the customers, but to reduce those churn rates and ultimately drive up profits for all of our businesses.
Great. All right, Tyson. Yeah, thank you so much. I like that. The bundle is not dead. Put that on a t-shirt for the industry. All right, next up, meet Ankur Snood. Ankur is the Business Development Director for Service Providers with Bitdefender. Welcome.
Good morning, good afternoon to people on the East Coast. So we had Bitdefender. We're focused on cybersecurity. I think a slide will pop up here any second now. Yep, there it is. So we're a cybersecurity company, but the focus for the panel today is really on IoT security. So IoT security can mean so many things, but specifically consumer security for the home. We were actually first to market with our IoT security solution back in 2015. And so especially this year and going forward, as remote work and remote learning increases across the US and the globe, the question is, how are consumers protecting themselves from cyber threats, right? So at Bitdefender, we've been able to take our solution and port it over to, in this example, the Netgear Armor, but also in various other ecosystems with ISPs. And we feel ISPs are uniquely positioned to maximize in this market. Obviously, they have millions of connections across the globe. There's a trust factor that customers have with their ISPs. And then at Bitdefender, we have over 500 million endpoints covered across the globe, being the most used endpoint security company in the world. So we have all these protocols in our cloud to help ISPs to really maximize this opportunity to protect their end customers, especially IoT devices.
Awesome. All right, Ankur, thank you for that introduction. We have a poll question I want to turn to. Hopefully all of our attendees today have had a chance to weigh in on the poll in the poll tab. Our first question here is, what smart home use case will be most accelerated due to COVID-19? And so I'm looking at the numbers here changing in real time. And we see about 39% of you say home networking, 30% or so say elder care and independent living. So those are the two primary use cases that you see really interestingly impacted by COVID-19. Residential security, about 14, and then energy management as well. Yeah, so it's been really interesting as, again, as consumers spend more time at home, what they're realizing about new kind of pain points that can be addressed by the industry. Great. So I want to turn attention to our panel this morning. Oren, I want to start with you. Obviously, the COVID-19 crisis has caused a lot of consumers to reevaluate how they live, work, and play in their homes, or how best to care for loved ones, wherever home is. So what are some of the more interesting smart home use cases that you've seen coming out of the COVID experience?
Yeah, I think that basically what you've had in your poll are the most interesting use cases that we see currently gaining market focus. We definitely see as we deal mainly with elder care currently with the new applications that we offer, we see the demand there, and we see it growing definitely since elder care people, due to COVID-19, they need to stay at home, and it's really hard for family members to meet with them even if they want to. So anything that can strengthen the ability of a family member to identify a potential problem with such an aging in place parent definitely helps.
Are there trends in your technology that you think are interesting?
Specific trends which are related to our specific technology?
Sure, yours or other things that you're seeing in the market?
Not something that again, not something that relates to our specific technology. We bring something which is specific and based on smartphone devices, but I guess that across the board, aging in place solutions, fall detection, inactivity detection is something that's going to rapidly grow.
Sure. So this issue of activity monitoring as invisibly as possible, right? We see a lot of conversation about that. Tyson and Ankur, what about some of these other use cases? What do you see?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things we've seen is that there's more load on the system with people working and schooling from home. With that type of load on the system, folks are looking for specific solutions that actually can improve basically and prioritize the traffic they want prioritized for specific purposes. So what I think of, and we've had a lot of inquiries about this from large Fortune 100 companies, is how do I ensure that my work from home employees, now there's thousands of them, and they're looking and paying very close attention to that, because what they're thinking about is saying, I can either spend, however many thousands of dollars on 200 square feet of physical space for my employee to come in, but it seems like they're actually just as productive and possibly more productive working from home. So how do I ensure that they can continue to be productive, to ensure that the connectivity is there, but then for the applications that they use on a daily basis, whether it's Zoom or Suite or whatever it might be, how can you ensure that those are prioritized during my work time so that I can continue to be productive, while at the very same time bifurcating a network and having a recreational network where the kids are on Netflix or whatever it is? So really important that we're seeing kind of this movement, and we started seeing it many years ago, but now really starting to take off as a result of COVID, which is software-defined networks are the way of the future. And with those software-defined networks, you can do exactly what I just mentioned, which is bifurcate that network into work network, recreational network, and then prioritize the traffic to ensure that your employees are actually productive during their work time. Because if they're not, as you know, productivity slips, and then the cost associated with allowing it work from home indefinitely, the business case starts to break down. So that's kind of what we're seeing is bifurcation of networks. We're seeing prioritization of specific work traffic or school traffic necessary. Those are some of the important things that I think we're seeing. So that home networking is kind of the biggest, the 39% that you mentioned. Everybody said that's kind of the most important thing. We can echo that sentiment.
Sure. Ankur?
Yeah, so to kind of piggyback on what Tyson said, we're also seeing a renewed focus on from a security perspective. So it used to be people used to go to the office and you received enterprise grade security in the office, but now by some estimates, over 50% of the people are currently working from home because of remote work. So the question is, how do you get that enterprise grade security at the home? So there used to be a fine line between enterprise grade security and consumer grade security, but that line has been a little bit bludgeoned because of what's been going on. So we're seeing that's a major trend that we're seeing. Large enterprises who have thousands of customers, employees, working from home. How do we protect that data. We're also seeing a focus on parental controls now, a renewed focus, I would say. So, parental controls has always been a very complex issue because there's so many different apps, there's so many different ecosystems on how to control different IoT devices and different mobile devices and laptops and desktops. But now kids and parents are all working from home or schooling from home. So how do you make sure your son or daughter are not going on social media, playing Xbox while you're working? And so now we're seeing a focus on how we could control some of this, some of these applications, so people can be more productive at home.
So let's explore that a little bit. I'm curious, and this is probably with both Tyson and Ankur, this whole notion of enterprise grade security for work at home employees. We've already seen a couple of products come to market. Comcast has one. A lot of conversation in this space. How do you see this practically implemented? Are we talking about another piece of hardware, right, that gets dropped into the home or are we talking about it's all going to be software defined?
I think software defined is going to be the way to go. Another piece of hardware just adds a whole level of unneeded complexity, right? So you think about ISPs around the world, especially in the US, people don't want another piece of hardware to attach to their router. First of all, for an ISP to support that is unnecessary amount of calls. Troubleshooting it could be a pain, right? So the question is, how do you make it as seamless for the customer and for the ISP so they can improve the customer experience, their NPS, but at the same time support the customer use cases tied to security? And so I think the best way is software defined, right? You take the software, like for instance, Bitdefender, and you take that agent and you put it inside the router. And you can put it in any router, it's portable, right? So any device connected to the router, whether it be like a connected fridge or IoT light bulb or a Ring doorbell, Samsung TV, doesn't matter. Connected to the router will have certain security protocols protected by it. And then you can integrate the app into the ISP's APIs so those consumer can just click it and they can see everything, all their devices connected. They could restrict the content if they want to. They could see any threats available all in one click of an app. And I think that's the easiest way to do it to prevent unnecessary burden on the ISP and the consumers.
I would definitely agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, if you think about it, there's the agent in the gateway, but those agents, they're just dumb agents, right? They just do a couple of very small things, which is send all of the data to the cloud. And really the power is actually in the cloud. And that's obviously extremely important. We're talking about massive amounts and loads of data. And to go ahead and run ML models on that data so that you can ultimately provision a rule back down to the agent on that device to take action, it's again, that agent is only doing a very small part of the job. All of the real intelligence sits in the cloud. So I think, from a security perspective, there's always been talk of VPN. I actually would agree that it's much more cloud-based. It's about a cloud gateway where you're sending and publishing all those packets to the cloud. And it's really the smart algorithms that sit in the cloud that determine what actions to actually take. And those actions are based on, a number of different ML models that run, to look for anomalies and things of that nature. And the reality is most of the companies out there that are allowing these massive work from home forces indefinitely, they're all cloud-based. VPN and that sort of strategy might be okay and might be necessary for a few of the applications, but it's not, the cost associated with that is just too much. So it's all about the data. It's all about the cloud being able to actually take action and smart action based on the amount of data. So the more data you have, the more devices you see, the more secure the network will actually ultimately become.
Actually, also ties into your point, the VPN gives a false sense of security, right?
Yeah.
Because there's cases where if a VPN can be a VPN network for an enterprise company can be compromised, then everything is compromised. And so, what's your extra layer of security to really protect these laptops? Some of them that are very old. So I agree with you 100%, Tyson, to your point about the cloud.
So it sounds like you guys don't anticipate this kind of new use case driving a lot of hardware upgrades, that the installed base has enough memory processing speed to take these agents. But it's really going to be more about the service providers, right, getting on board.
Yeah.
And then, of course, a company is challenged to contract with all the various service providers their employees might use, which is
Yeah, it's a great point that you bring up about the hardware too, because it creates a massive sense of confusion in the home as well. So I'll give you an example. Today, my physical security system actually runs on a separate router. And my wife constantly comes to me and says, I don't know I can't see the cameras on our network. And I said, well, they're not on our network. They're actually on a separate network. And she says, well, what's the SSID for that network? I don't even know what's the network we're talking about. Why are there two networks? And so it creates a massive amount of confusion. And the problem with bifurcating it in that way from a hardware perspective is you're wondering where that data is actually going. And if you have a single cloud gateway that's trying to manage everything in your home, but then you've got these very important secure devices sitting over here on a separate network that you can't really manage, I think it becomes quite challenging, right? As opposed to one single cloud network that can actually look at all of the devices and can bifurcate using software to determine what is work related, what is recreation related, right? And the world is moving way too fast for any of us to ever rely on hardware, right? Because we don't know what devices are going to come in to our worlds. We don't know what's going to be the next great thing. So given the speed at which things are moving, everything better be moved to the cloud. Otherwise, none of us will be able to react quick enough to the market demand.
Sure. Let me switch topics a little bit here. Certainly during COVID, we've seen every step in the smart home value chain has faced new opportunities and challenges from manufacturers, software development, sales, installation, onboarding, and support. How has your particular place in the value chain been impacted, and what have you learned? Oren, I'll let you start.
Sure. Well, for us, it's definitely sales. We've just launched our product in September into the US market, and then with COVID-19 coming in January, February, everything stopped for us. And it makes you more dynamic. You need to think about new use cases for your product. Where else can the product fit given the new demands or the new market trends? And this is where we've switched our product, which was initially a product for touch-free, voice-free operation of smart home devices, to a more secure related product that deals with false alarm identification and family safety features, which are now something that people look for, especially again, given the fact that they cannot visit their close relatives.
So that's the kind of adaptation that I was talking about early on, which I think a lot of people can identify with this year. Ankur, what's changed for any aspect of your business due to COVID?
So I agree with Oren. Initially, it was sales. So a lot of projects that were about to start halted once COVID happened. I think part of that was ISPs were, all companies were shocked when COVID happened, right? Because a lot of the way things work shut down immediately. And a lot of companies that are used to working in the office had to immediately adapt to working from home. But I think over time, as businesses have evolved, they've realized that security has become a very important in today's world in the days of COVID. And a lot of ISPs who are used to having employees in the office every day have now adapted and are now figuring out how to do things remotely, right? Because I think one thing we've realized during this pandemic is if you're a home internet provider, you're basically on Maslow's pyramid. You're as important as food and water, right? It's non-negotiable to have working internet in today's world, especially now. And so now we're seeing renewed growth starting in the third quarter, where projects that shut down in February are now opening up all of a sudden. We have some partners that are looking to launch very aggressive timelines because they understand how important security is with people working and so much more from home and doing school at home. And with internet becoming so much more important, they want to understand how important it is to have that layer of protection for their end customers.
Sure. Makes sense. It's encouraging. Tyson, what would you add?
Yeah, so our business actually was different. We accelerated. We actually doubled the customer count over this period, and it's really given to exactly what Ankur just said, which is good connectivity is just as important as food and water to most people now. And so when COVID came in, all of the ISP's business was put under a microscope, and it was, do you really serve me the Wi-Fi and the internet speeds that I'm paying for and that I expect from you? And so that became a really big thing. And beyond that, it became about how do I continue to turn up new customers in this COVID environment? So we actually started to see customers who historically always wanted to roll a truck to provide what they called the white glove service. And they transitioned to, let's just drop ship devices and new routers to customers. And in a very easy way, really start saving the cost of the truck roll, $150. They were very tepid about doing it historically because they weren't sure really what that customer experience would look like. So they jumped in with us, and if anybody's set up Plume, it takes about 7 minutes. It's actually quite simple. And a lot of our customers just started saying, not only are we going to try this now, but it's worked, and we will no longer roll trucks to install new customers. So a lot of the customers, we doubled the business because, really service came under a microscope. And then the second thing that we saw was, given that we have this self-install capability, that allowed a huge opportunity for folks to continue adding new customers, but also to save a lot of money in these times, as you can imagine is important, on truck rolls.
Great. And certainly the lifetime value of the customer has gone up a lot, right? It helps the business model work. So we've been talking about this next question kind of around about it, but since our theme is tipping points and triggers, I'm just curious, thinking more generally about the connected home and the technologies in the home, do you see COVID providing small triggers for certain product categories? Obviously, home networking is a big one that we've been talking about. Or do you foresee kind of lasting tipping point that will drive the whole connected technology industry toward mass adoption? In other words, a year from now, a year and a half from now, will things kind of go back? Or do you see this whole experience really accelerating, creating that wave, the metaphor I've been using?
So I'll start in the 5-day work week is dead, right? So I think before COVID, I don't know, some estimates showed 5 to 10% of people working from home. Right now, obviously, it's significantly higher. But a year from now, or a year and a half from now, when things return back to normal, we're going to see companies now realize that people can work from home and they can still be productive. And I think someone on the panel mentioned this earlier, that they realize they don't need to use that office space. So you're going to see, I think, a move to hybrid working environments, and some companies are going to just do fully remote because they realize they could be just as productive, if not more productive. And so I think that's going to drive mass adoptions towards certain IoT platforms. I was reading a Park study earlier last week, and you guys were talking about how a lot of people are now during COVID are looking towards external security, right? Because they're spending more time at home, so they want to know what's going on around their house. And I think we're going to continue seeing devices like that be adopted. And I think we're going to see tremendous amount of growth once COVID is done in the connected home as a result of this.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you just kind of a unique example. We've had probably about 10 to 15 people move during COVID. Plumians moved from Palo Alto, California to somewhere else. And the reason why they're able to do this is because this pandemic has proven that people can be just as productive at home. They don't need to be in that workplace. With these new services like Zoom and making it really easy for people to collaborate, Slack, all these different tools, working from home is not a problem. And so it's giving people the opportunity to become much more mobile. I think what that's going to lead to, and we're seeing it, is that the network inside the home is absolutely critical. but people don't want two networks. They want a single network. And again, going back and just echoing again and again about this concept of software-defined network, I think it's really important because the lines have completely blurred between what is work and what is home, right? So when I wake up every morning, my daughter actually thinks that I'm at home, but I'm working. I'm just in a different room, but I'm working. And she is on Zoom doing schoolwork, or she's doing whatever it is on a single network. So as far as what's going to be triggered, it's not only the connectivity, but I think Encore mentioned earlier, really important is that I want to ensure that I know what she's doing when I can't be right there in front of her, now that she has access to a computer and needs to have access for schooling purposes. But as we all know, when we were all kids once, we'd like to take these divergent paths and start looking on the internet at different things. And so we want to be able to have this single network. We want to make sure it's secure. And the final thing, to ensure that we're productive, we have to be able to prioritize the traffic that we as workers want prioritized to ensure we can be productive. If we cannot be productive at home, then the entire business case breaks down for companies who want to allow indefinite work from home, giving them the opportunity not to be in battles and fights for talent against massive companies like Google or Facebook, for instance, for talent. Now you can get talent anywhere. It doesn't matter where you are, and you get happier employees who can kind of go where they want to go. So you can only do that with a solid network that needs to be secure and ultimately can work for the entire family, because your home is no longer just your home. It's also now your office.
Great, thanks, Tyson. Oren, what would you add?
I definitely agree with both my colleagues. I can tell you, we are based in Israel, and Israel has gone through 2 lockdowns already. I think that we are the first in the world to go through a second lockdown. So here in Israel, work from home is not a dream. It's something that we already know that's going to be here for a long time and definitely stay. After COVID, we've learned how to work from home, and it works great. For me, as a company owner, development is something that I was really curious to see how it goes, but surprisingly, it went very well. People work from home. Our developers do a great job even from home, sometimes even better than being at the office. But what we saw and was really surprising is sales. I think that COVID changed the way that we do sales, and that's something that's going to stay. We no longer value face-to-face meetings. We value Zoom meetings, which cost us less time and money, and enable us to do much more sales at much smaller time frames. And maybe going back to the previous question, I think that one of the things that were changed, we are a hardware, we are a device manufacturer. And one of the things that we've seen, although we manufacture and have always manufactured here in Israel, we saw a lot of other companies switching their manufacturing to local manufacturers, because that gave them much better control over manufacturing during these crazy times.
Right. Yeah. Very interesting. So one of the questions we have for our audience under the poll tab really relates to barriers and overcoming certain barriers that might become potential triggers for market acceleration. So the question we ask is, overcoming which industry challenge is most likely to cause a tipping point in smart home adoption? So you've all had a chance to weigh in here, and by far, you believe interoperability at about 43% or more is kind of the number one barrier that could cause a tipping point, followed up by addressing user experience issues, 23%, followed by value perceptions, affordability, data privacy, and security. By the way, these are all perennially barriers in our consumer surveys, where consumers who don't own devices weigh in on what are the leading reasons they don't. So let's talk about this a little bit from the panel's perspective. What, in your perspective, what is the most pressing issue to solve, and why? Would you agree that it's interoperability, or would you put the emphasis somewhere else?
So I'm a security company, so I'm always to say data privacy. But what I will say is I think interoperability and user experience go hand in hand. I think most people would agree. And so I think one way to correct some of these perceived issues is how do you centralize that, right? Because there's so many different devices in the home, so many different apps, so many different ecosystems. And one way to do that is through security to where there's an app, I think Comcast spoke earlier today, where you have one app in the device talking to the cloud that has everything connected to a router, right? That's the central point of your home for the connected home is a router. And that kind of streamlines the user experience and interoperability as well, right? Simple use case, I think I mentioned it earlier, is parental controls, right? So if you have, if your son has school, but he also has Xbox, he also has his iPhone, he also has his laptop where you can go on Facebook from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. with using our agent, you could block social media, you could block them from using their Xbox, you could block them from using their smart TV, right? And so you could do that all in one app, and that same app, you could also see what devices are connected. And so I think it goes hand in hand. But once again, data privacy, I think, is becoming increasingly important. I mean, you mentioned earlier, we've seen a 1% growth rate on IoT security, but I think in the same study you guys mentioned that we're going to see almost vertical growth in IoT device adoption in a connected home potentially after COVID. And so the question is, you have all these devices with no security protocol applications, or some of them is not regulated, that they buy devices on Amazon, let's say like a cheap connected light bulb, and how you're protecting all these devices. I think one of my colleagues mentioned it earlier, Tyson mentioned earlier, where there's not a line between home and work anymore. So you have all your data, your consumer data, your private information in your house, as well as your work information. And so any of these devices can be a threat vector for your home. And so data privacy becomes increasingly important. And so I would say that would become the most important thing. And actually, my last point, Bitdefender actually did a study earlier this year, and we realized about in the US, 35% of US households have actually been compromised in one way or another, either through a phishing attempt or an IoT device being compromised. And so it becomes increasingly important to make sure you correct some of these issues.
Yeah, I agree. We found in asking consumers question about data privacy security problems they've experienced, the challenge is they don't know. They don't, many things can happen and they have no idea. They could be leveraged for a botnet attack and they just have no way of knowing that. So great. So what else would Oren or Tyson, would you add about these barriers and potential triggers?
The barriers, so the interoperability is an interesting point, because what I totally agree that the router itself in the home is kind of the central point. And we see battles for the living room with the giants, right? The tech giants like a Google or an Amazon trying to get in. The router is still they're at a significant disadvantage. Kind of the way the world works today, and we always hear this word ecosystem. But when you look at when people present ecosystem, and I've recently seen it, where the only devices that are shown are the ones that are built or managed by a particular company. So when you think of Google and their Nest products and stuff, that is not an ecosystem, that's an island. And there are these little islands. There's the Google island, there's the Amazon island. There are all these little islands out there, and they're trying to make ways to kind of connect those islands and build this ecosystem. The only ones who can do it are the ISPs, because this is 1000% about data. The whole hardware IoT world, that's 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. You know, putting more devices in the home, that will continue to happen. But now it's great. Now that those devices are in the home, what can I actually do? And I think rather than thinking about the smart home as if I open my door, my light turns on, that's a very physical rule and response. Think of it more like I'm collecting that data, and I can do things like protect my home from cyber threats, or I can ensure that my daughter or son doesn't go on TikTok. Or with motion, Plume Motion, for instance, there are no more sensors needed in the home. It's taking data, collecting data from all the devices in your home and turning them into actual sensors for a service. So I actually think it's about moving from a hardware-centric belief and thought of the smart home to a data-driven belief for digital services. And the only ones that can do that when you have these little islands out there and not really an ecosystem is the ISP. So the barrier is really going to be the ISP's willingness to partner with the Google and the Amazons of the world to collect that data and ultimately find a way to drive value for the consumer that only they can do, right? And keeping Amazon and Google at bay. Because again, the router is the central point. They have a significant advantage. Until they kind of open up to that and agree to participate with these folks and drive the value on their own, I think it's going to be, the smart home will be challenged. But I think this is a trigger. This can be it, where the ISPs wake up and say, I can be the one, the Switzerland, if you will, to aggregate that data and create digital experiences, not hardware for Nest or Amazon Echoes or whatever it is, right? They're never going to go into that route because they don't want to go direct to consumer. So they've got to think of these digital services. Their willingness to participate is going to be the biggest barrier.
Yeah, it is a kind of a two-sided coin, right? So the ISP service providers, aside from a few very large ones, need to wake up and assume this role. But the tech giants also have to be willing to share data, and and them ceding ground is, there's got to be incentives. It is interesting, Ankur. I appreciate your parsing the difference between interoperability and user experience. I've always thought interoperability is an engineering word, right? But from a consumer perspective, all they really want is a unified experience, right? And what's passing for that right now is, cloud-based personal assistants in a hub and spoke architecture, but the devices aren't really talking directly to one another in the way we traditionally think of home control being most effective. So we're kind of in this in-between stage. Oren, anything else you would add just about these barriers and what could be?
Sure. I first of all, I want to relate to Tyson and what he said about islands. I think that currently ISPs that offer smart home, they are islands of their own, because they have their, when it comes to hardware, they have their own platform and their own set of devices that they are offering, and they are taking care of the interoperability and everything. But that's only relevant to whatever works with their platform. Where I see the value is on the point of value perception, and definitely on educating the market about the smart home, the use cases of the smart home, because to me it seems that customers currently buying mostly the devices where the use cases and the value is straightforward. And they're not buying other devices because they don't understand where the value is, and it goes back to affordability. What's affordability? If you understand the value, you can evaluate whether a device is something that's affordable or too expensive. Everything here is, at the end of the day, especially in the smart home, it's mainly about ROI. Getting back some money because the investment is something that people, it's not small money. Even today with the do-it-yourself devices, it's not a small money. So people look for the ROI, and it also always goes to educating the market.
Let me add on that. So what's interesting is, we've seen this movie play out before in the video space. So the ISP said, take what I give you, you'll take what I give you, and you'll be happy with it. And ultimately what happened is all the over-the-top video providers started to come in, offering consumer choice. And the consumer decided what they wanted. And it wasn't the big video packs, right, that were already pre-baked for them. And we've seen this same movie play out before. What the ISPs can do now is they can be the platform that ties all of this together. So this is an opportunity, and give the consumer choice to say, all right, if you want a Nest thermostat, by all means. And if you want an Amazon Echo, by all means, go ahead and get it. And I'm okay with that. In fact, I want you to go buy those things because I am the data provider. And if I can figure out how to add value to your home as a platform, then I will win, right? And if they don't do that, then the ISPs will be in the same kind of dogfight they're in right now on the video side of things. So we've seen this exact same movie play out before. You've got to open up to the ecosystem and be the one that basically is the platform provider. If you don't do that, then somebody else will jump in and try and become that platform provider and fill that vacuum. But the ISPs, again, they see every packet, whether it's a Nest thermostat, an Amazon Echo, or one of their own devices, they see the packets. And that data can be used to create value for the customer. So they're in a very unique position. It's going to be about them saying, I'm going to go ahead and open up, and I am going to figure out the way to drive value for the customer because I am the platform. If they don't do that, it'll end up in the same OTT video situation that we currently see the ISPs in today.
Okay, I want to shift to a few of our audience questions. I mean, obviously, the tone of the panel in the last hour has been, really pro service provider, right? And you get a little skepticism from, a few people in the audience. So let me throw a few questions at you and let you guys react to that. So someone asked, how do we address the issues with tech support from our ISPs for all of us at home who are experiencing slow speeds despite what they're buying? And how do we trust the ISPs around security when we do not see, this person says, we don't see anything from them. So obviously there's an expression of a kind of a crisis of confidence in the service provider that's experienced from the consumer side right now through the way tech support is handled, transparency around security issues. So how would you respond to those thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in for a second. The ISP has had, look, Brad, we are pro ISP here. I want to make that clear. We're completely pro ISP. We think we're just sort of seeing a market where we want the ISP to step up. And Plume has lots of customers where those ISPs have stepped up and realized that they can actually add more value to those customers who typically don't believe what they don't see. So we do, from a cybersecurity perspective, have to show the customers that we're adding value. Today, their only KPI, to your point, is what's my internet speed? That's their only KPI. But what if their KPI was, how secure have you made me? So on a daily basis, how secure have you made me? And on a daily basis, what's my quality of experience on my devices? So there's definitely a quality of experience score that can be a KPI, and there's definitely a cybersecurity score as a KPI. We just need to start exposing the customer to those scores and showing them that, yeah, we're adding a lot of value here.
To Tyson's point and the question from the audience member, I think for years, the ISP world for home internet has been very static, right? We've seen some of the bigger ISPs make some changes in security, not too much, and try to help improve, I guess, tech support perceived issues. But I think because of COVID and with 5G coming out in the next few years, you're going to see a lot of this stuff accelerate, right? Because before, in a lot of places, you only had one internet provider who would offer a set amount of speed because, frankly, they didn't need to offer a higher speed, right? But first thing with 5G is going to help change a lot of that dynamic, and it's going to help create competition in some markets that are, you could say, underserved, right? So hopefully, I think in the next 3 to 5 years, some of that's going to be corrected on its own. From a tech perspective, and I think to Tyson's point, adding a level of security will help create trust with the consumers, right? So I think right now, a lot of consumers don't trust their ISPs because they think there's not transparent, right? It's like, to your point, Tyson, it's only one metric is internet service. But if you start adding other metrics as an ISP and to the consumer, it'll help create a trust relationship with them and transparency, right? And if you have an app that shows all the devices that are connected, and that same app can have parental control, that same app can shows you all the times you're protected from a phishing attack or a malware attack, that'll help create that trust. It's going to take time to happen, but you have to first take that first step and implement that technology, give it to the consumer, and then over a few months or a few years, you're going to start seeing that trust happen. So it takes a long time to happen, but once you get that trust, it's hard to lose.
Sure. Well, we have other service provider questions, but I want to kind of move on to another topic, and we'll try to respond to those or give you a chance to respond to them offline because I think it's a very interesting part of the conversation. Someone did also ask about the chip protocol. So connected home over IP, kind of what's your take on, the chip working group has announced that they'll have a standard complete by the end of this year and start to roll out, compatible products and services maybe by mid-year next year. What are your thoughts about the future impact of chip really accelerating the market forward?
I think it's a good thing, right? Right now, I can say for Bitdefender, we've been able to, let's say, put our agent in different ecosystems with different chipsets and all, and various other, variables. But I think something like that helps streamline the market a little bit, and it'll help create some of those other issues you discussed earlier, interoperability, perceived issues, and user experience issues. Will help correct some of those issues long term.
I definitely agree with Ankur on that. The only thing that I see here, which kind of worries me, is maybe these are a little bit, a big consortium of companies, big companies that are now making a bigger island for their own use. And that's the big question that pops up in my head when I think about chip. We've seen similar tries in the past, big companies trying to create standard protocols. It never succeeded so far. Maybe this time it will happen. But again, the thing is whether this will be an open protocol for everyone to participate in and really create the interoperability that everyone looks for, or just a bigger island.
Tyson, any thoughts?
Look, I think interoperability and lots of big companies coming together to create kind of a homogeneous way to approach the things, I think, is always good. I agree with Oren. It's going to be how open does it really become, and I think that's the important thing. Because if we see ecosystems that are just islands to themselves now popping up, and that's all they become, again, the consumer is going to choose something else. So this is so you got to be a little careful about pushing so much onto the consumer in a certain way, as opposed to allowing kind of the market to determine what can happen. So you can do that by setting kind of the ground rules, but allowing other people to participate and play in those, in the same sandbox. I think that the ISPs, again, have this tremendous opportunity if they can figure out what is the value add and stand up and say, I am the platform, and a lot of this is going to come through me, and then really provide that value added service. I think it's great. But again, it'll be the homogeneous network, and chip, I think, is great. It's going to be about how are they willing to participate with the other islands that are out there, will be important.
Also, by the way, talking about the protocol level, I come from the security industry. I've been in the home security industry for many years. I've seen many companies trying to create a standard protocol that handles sensors, video, and everything else. It's not easy. There are different standards here, different requirements. It goes back to battery life for chips that handles these protocols. It's a huge task.
So similar to chip, we had another question from the audience that asked, if ISPs are going to be so central or play such a central role, do you think that we'll see similar kinds of standardization for data management and data storage, and kind of more uniformity across eyes? Or you're shaking your head before I even finish the sentence. What do you think?
Definitely not. It's all about, if it's all about ISPs and big data and ability to big customers value by looking at this big data and coming up with insights, I don't see how ISPs cooperate between them. At the end of the day, it's a service, and everyone wants the customer connected to their own service. So that's my thought.
So that will remain your secret sauce.
Like everything, at the end of the day, it's all about business, right? We are not here, someone needs to pay for that. And that's going to be the ISPs are going to put huge investments, and they need the customers with them. So
Yeah, I mean,
that's life.
My thought on that would be that, why, that shouldn't be the focus of the ISP. I mean, there are plenty of great data management platforms out there. Why get into that business, right? The business should be, what are the new services that I can deliver, right, to my customers? Let somebody else go figure out like data management and stuff, and be willing to go partner with those folks. And it's really about what can you actually do with that data? So now that it's just managed and organized, okay, but what service are you going to actually deliver off of that data? And so to me, that data management piece is much more of just a commodity. And I'm not sure why anybody would really be focused there other than the folks that are out there like Snowflake or Splunk or some of these guys. And you just focus on what service can I actually create, whether it's value for my end consumer or whether it's value for my existing business units internally. How do I create value for them as well? And let's let somebody else focus on data management. If everybody wants to get together and say, we're going to choose and use this particular data management system, that's a pretty, that's an interesting decision to make, but it's what can you do with that data now that it's in? I don't know that I'd be focused on the data management side so much as what service can I create based on that data that's come in.
I agree with Tyson and Oren. I'd also take a step further and say, I think you're seeing a tale of two worlds here. You're already seeing it happen. Where the tier one ISPs, to Oren's point, they want their data. They have a lot of applications to use it. Some of them own network channels. Some of them own large advertising businesses, right? So they're not necessarily going to want to share it. But I think the smaller ones, who are still by global standards in the US, or a tier two ISP can be a tier one anywhere else in the world, they might be more likely to come together, right? Because they don't have the same resources as some of the real large guys, and really help centralize their data. And then together they can get better information.
Listen, the big data from IoT devices, it's like a big social network of devices. And in the same way that we don't see, and we won't see LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter give up their data for someone else to figure out services based on that data, we won't see anyone that collects the IoT devices data giving the data to an external ISP or something like that. So at the end of the day, the money is where the data is. And of course, what you do with it, what services you bring to customer based on the data and the analysis you're able to do on it, that's your value proposition to the customer.
Yeah, and so take Plume, for instance, is kind of interesting because we see, 20 some odd million homes right now and the data that's provided by those homes. And those are across well over 100 different customers. And so we collect, organize, publish that data on their behalf back to them. And then it's about, okay, well, what services can we provide? Again, there are services to the end user like cybersecurity or parental controls. But I think to Oren's point or Ankur's point about advertising, the advertising group, they're already using some sort of demand side platform, for instance, so that they can serve up advertising through video or advertising on their owned and operated properties on the web. What's interesting to them is segmentation data. So really what you think of there is, okay, I need a data pipe that's fed directly to the advertising. It's already my data because those are my customers. I just need help organizing it and publishing it so that I can drive a higher CPM. And they're my own customers. So I'm not doing anything outside the privacy boundaries necessarily. It's just, I want that data fed to me in a certain way, whether it's on a certain cadence or the type or amount of data. So it becomes about speed and velocity of the data that feeds the advertising platform, right? And so that's where you see, it's not just the end user and creating services for them. That is literally a service for an internal group called the advertising group. So those opportunities are there. And you can take learnings from a massive scale, a massive scale platform that is shared across the ISPs And you can start thinking of the services. And then ultimately what you do is you feed the data back to that particular company, whether it's a Comcast or whether it's somebody as small as a Point Broadband who has 6,000 subscribers. They are all set up the same way and they all have the same aspirations. So you can still do that in a unique way where you're not tripping up a bunch of privacy things.
Great. Well, listen, that's going to have to be kind of a wrap on the conversation. It's really been great having all you guys join us. I think we covered a lot of ground. There's a lot more we could talk about, but I really appreciate you being part of Connections Community this year. Okay, so next up, we're going to wrap up this track. We have these Zoom networking groups that we hope you'll take advantage of. We're grateful they're sponsored by April Air this morning. One of the groups is Stories of Pivots and Adaptation. So we kind of started that theme in this track and we can carry on those conversations. Our middle track this afternoon starts at 12:30 p.m. Central Time and goes to 2:30. So we hope you'll join us for a discussion around creating value through elevated user experiences. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back real soon.